Welcome to the Demeere podcast. We talk about martial arts, self-defense, and a whole lot more. And now, your host, Demeere.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the podcast where we talk about martial arts, self-defense, and a whole lot more. And I'm very happy to have one of my friends here now that I'm going to interview, Mr. Terry Trahan. Terry, how are you?
Good. How are you, Wim?
I'm excellent, and I'm mostly happy that we finally get to do this because I've placed you as one of the first people on my list of interviews that I wanted to do back a few months ago when I decided to start up my podcast. So this is a lot of fun for me, and we finally get a little bit of time to catch up as well because it's I think the last time we saw each other was when I did my ninja appearance at the Violence Dynamics seminar a few years ago, I think.
Yeah, that was April last year. So it's been a while.
Yeah. So just to give everybody a little bit of an idea, so I always share with them a little bit if I know the person I'm interviewing. So I think we first got in touch maybe almost 20 years ago when I did a review of one of Mark McYoung's books, and you were in the pictures with him, and I called you Mr. Black. And,
I remember that.
And you sent me an email, hi, it's Mr. Black here, and I think that was the first time we corresponded. And then I think we met at one of the barbecues. It's been a while, maybe 15 years ago.
I think we met at like the second or third barbecue.
Yeah. So for the people who don't know, Mark McYoung has this annual Animal List barbecue where a bunch of let's say interesting people meet up from all kinds of backgrounds.
That's an understatement.
Yeah, I'm trying to not freak out everybody by giving more details. And I think that's the first time we met, and obviously you were online a lot in some of the forums back in the day as a moderator. I saw you there a couple times as well. And basically, you know, that's how we met. Now, for the people who aren't up to speed of what you've been doing, pretty much your whole life, could you give a little bit of a background? For instance, maybe let's start a little bit with the martial arts that you've been practicing in self-defense systems.
Okay, I started a long time ago just doing like boxing and wrestling. I got into some judo and jiu-jitsu. Progressed through that, had a need and a desire to learn more and be more proficient, mostly due to lifestyle and work choices. And somehow I ended up getting involved in both Indonesian and Filipino martial arts, and that's probably what I've stuck with the most. Excuse me.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead. You were talking.
I ended up studying under a couple really good people and took over systems or was next in line. Became a member of the Kapatiran Santukan Martial Arts Organization and became a full instructor in our style of Kali Silat, and then became director of the organization a few years ago.
Okay. And do you still practice Silat mainly, or is it different now? The way you practice from before, different styles, different take on it? How would you describe it?
Mostly a different take. Like I said, I studied a lot of things. My base was more Western-oriented, boxing and wrestling and stuff like that. And so I've kind of incorporated that with the Silat and the Kali and the combatives and stuff. And my personal belief is you have to take the art and make it fit you, how you move, how you see things, and based on your experiences. And that's what I try to get across to my students a lot. Okay.
And you mentioned it a little bit, you know, lifestyle choices and professional reasons. So could you talk a little bit more about your background working in violence professions and as a bouncer and so on?
Yeah, I was a bouncer pretty much straight for about a decade, plus on and off, working in different bars when I needed extra money. I also, the lifestyle choice that originally started me learning martial arts was I grew up, you know, in a mid-sized town, and there wasn't a whole lot going on, so we would fight, and, you know, there's a military town, so we had a whole bunch of conflict there, and I was a gang member, graduated up through the ranks in that, became a bouncer. I also did some bodyguard work, mostly for musicians and porn stars, just a bunch, whatever I could do to make money at the time.
Yeah. Well, and that's what I always liked about the information that you gave, and when you would talk about martial arts, self-defense, weapons, and all these things, you always had a very practical approach to it, no nonsense, and just not necessarily against traditional martial arts or anything like that, because, like you said, you practice styles like Silat and so on, but a very no nonsense and pragmatic take on how to do that. And you just mentioned it in that you have to make the art fit the way you move, the way you think, and so on. So could you talk a little bit more about your philosophy of self-defense and practicing the arts with your specific background in mind?
Yeah, the first thing that I think I should touch on that made me a little more pragmatic about stuff is people are people, and they have, whatever weaknesses and infirmities that they have. I was born with some really bad knees and hips. So that necessitated making the first change.
Could you talk a little bit more about that? Because, you explained this to me, and the reason I ask is the first time we met at a barbecue, and I think either you were doing a class or you were, teaching a class, or you were training with somebody in somebody else's class, and afterwards we got to talking, and you mentioned your knees, and I was impressed with what you told me then, because it wasn't like you could spot in the way you moved that this was a huge issue or anything. So that's why I remember being very impressed at that point in time.
Yeah, thank you, by the way. When I was born, my legs were twisted backwards. My feet faced to the rear instead of to the front. And the correction for that, especially back then, was just to put the kid in a brace and have it twist the legs back around. In doing that, it really weakened the ligaments and tendons and stretched them out, so there's not a whole lot of connection there. Luckily, I met some people who gave me some exercises that I was able to help correct it, but it's always been very unstable. And that was the first step in realizing that I couldn't do everything the way I was taught, because my knee could go out and I could fall over at any moment.
Yeah. And that's what I think is one of the main drivers, basically, for many people when they watch certain martial arts or certain styles of self-defense, when they realize that, well, this is maybe very good, but it's not for me because of, for instance, certain physical limitations that you might have. It's just not possible. It's no matter of how much do you want it, or do you train hard. It's just that, physically speaking, it's out of reach.
Right. Yeah, and unfortunately, it seems still that people push their students too hard to not adapt the art, but to adapt themselves to the art. And more and more people are waking up to the fact that injuries, or just the way that your body shape is, or your physical type, doesn't lend itself to, a tall, skinny guy is not going to be as good at judo as a shorter, stockier guy. Yeah. And so you need to kind of adjust what you're doing to that.
Yeah, I think that's actually one of the most underestimated aspects of training for self-defense, when you pick up a specific art or system to learn how to defend yourself, because it's one of those things that's hard to understand unless something breaks down, meaning that sometimes you discover that your body is completely unsuited for the style that you're practicing, and you only find that out when it's too late. And this is a little bit of a pet peeve of mine when you go to many martial arts schools where maybe a young kid comes in and they're all about motivation and developing self-confidence and all that, which I think is perfectly fine. But then instilling a mindset, well, you can do anything you want if you just put your mind to it, which is nonsense, which is complete nonsense. Now, I get it for the kids what they want to do, but then, for instance, imagine if somebody was saying that to you when you go to Taekwondo class, and where you have to learn jump spinning back kicks with your knees and ankles not having the natural stability and strength that somebody else might have.
Yeah, it's unrealistic, and another part of the problem is people don't want to look at themselves realistically. We all want to have this image that we're just as good as everybody else, or we're physically perfect or whatever, and that puts a blind spot there, and you can really, really injure yourself if you don't take the blinders off.
Yeah, agreed. So what I wanted to ask also is that let's for instance say that you're going to get somebody you can teach for a couple of months, let's say 3 to 4 months, and you have that person for 2 to 3 sessions each week for about an hour and a half. How would you approach that? Now, it's a little bit of a trick question because people usually say, well, they ask you that question and you only have 1 day or 1 hour. What would you teach? Which I think is a little bit difficult to answer. But what in an ideal set of circumstances when you have somebody who is going to commit to a relatively not necessarily intense but regular type of training, but they don't want to make it their life or their passion the way that many martial artists or self-defense practitioners do?
The first thing I would do would be to sit down and explain to them the difference between fighting, martial arts, and self-defense, and get them started at looking at what self-defense is, the legal aspects of what we do, and how to make what you do fit into that. Then I would give them basic tools, and we would work the basic tools, against attacks that are most likely to happen, based on what they can do, on observation of what they can do, and then work the tools that fit for them the most. And then, honestly, most of it would be playtime. People learn best through play and through having fun and through just moving their body and learning how to adapt to that situation.
Yeah. Could you define playtime a little bit more for the listeners?
The easiest example I could give is if anybody's attended like one of Rory Miller's seminars or one of the violence dynamics seminars, we spend a lot of time on doing what's called the one-step drill. And it's unstructured. The only rule is that try to apply what it is we just covered in the previous class. But you go slow and you have somebody that you're playing with that can coach you if you get stuck. It's more of a cooperative, helpful environment instead of a competitive environment. And then, there's variations you can throw into it to make a challenge or to make it more fun, make it a game. But it's playtime. You're getting to explore what you just learned and how your body adapts to it and how you can apply it against somebody else. But it's not in a direct competitive manner.
Yeah. Now, one-step drills are obviously something that's been in traditional arts for a long time. And how would you say that the way that you guys practice it is different from what you, for instance, see the one-steps you see in Shotokan karate or classical taekwondo?
First, there's no set techniques that you have to go through. There's no rules on what you can do. It's all about being creative, using your imagination and the tools that you are given. We also can apply different limitations. You can make somebody play injured, tie their arm to their body or whatever. It's a lot more free-flowing and less structured because the biggest thing that we try to get across, me personally and in like the violence dynamics seminars, is that it's your ass on the line, and you have to be the one that picks what works for you. So explore it all and then concentrate on what you're good at. That's what impressed me about boxing and wrestling. You learn all the different techniques or moves or punches or whatever, but then your coach takes you and has you really concentrate on the ones that you're the best at.
Yeah, no, it makes perfect sense. Another thing that I wanted to mention about that, and I agree with you, the value of play and free-flowing work is, in my opinion, also one of the critical elements that should be a part of your training. If you remember, and I think this is about 10, 15 years ago, maybe a little bit longer, there was this criticism that was leveled at traditional art, that it wasn't alive enough, that it was too much, set and so on. And part of that was obviously directed at the type of drills, like one-step drills and so on. it seems to me that the way you're teaching these kinds of drills, it's more a combination of the things you can learn from a more or less limited environment, like a one-step where you only get to do one attack. But sticking into that concept of unpredictability and chaos and basically learning to just deal with it and make it work, as opposed to you have to do what the sensei says.
Yeah, that's, in my opinion, it's the only. If you want to learn, if you're studying an art to learn the art, that's one thing, and you have to do what the art says. But if you're studying it for self-defense, you have to be able to apply it, and you can use your imagination. You can apply variables. You can tell your partner that, hey, I really want to work on, attacks from the blind side and how to deal with that. It just opens up so much of the world. The criticism about martial arts, and I got involved in that because I've never been very traditional. I used to criticize, like the Shotokan or even some of the Salat styles that I did. I would criticize because they were trapped in an area I didn't want to be involved in. There's a point to all the different martial arts. They're made to do different things. And now that I've gotten much older and a little more wiser, I was trying to make a traditional art fit what I wanted without realizing that that's not what it was there for. People have a big misunderstanding that martial arts and self-defense are the same thing. And there's tools from each that can be used in the other one, but they're two totally separate cities. You can't live in Denver and Los Angeles at the same time. It's the same with martial arts and self-defense.
Yeah. That was actually one of the questions that I wanted to ask you. Could you maybe give some examples of mistakes that people make when it comes to that?
Yes. First thing that will open everybody's eyes up to it is self-defense is not a physical act. Self-defense is a legal claim. Self-defense is when you get arrested or hauled into court, you're saying, yes, I broke the law. This is why. It's not fighting. It's not. It's a mental structure. It's a legal structure you have to abide by. That's the biggest mistake. I'm going to learn self-defense, and no one ever talks about the legal aspects. Then you're not learning self-defense. You're just learning how to fight.
Yeah. No, makes perfect sense. And that's also one of the things that I try to emphasize to my students when I teach a traditional art, amongst other things, showing them that, well, this is a physical part that we're doing right here. Things like legal aspects and so on, or how do you deal with everything that goes on before the fight or the attack actually happens. What do you do afterwards? That is, for the most part, not something you learn in a traditional martial art. You can't get it there. Your martial arts teacher is not a lawyer. He's not a self-defense lawyer who specializes in getting people off who had to defend themselves. Heaven forbid they have to use lethal force, because your martial arts teacher, unless he's a lawyer who's pleading those cases, he doesn't necessarily has the best advice for you. Right,
totally. And it's becoming more common and a little more understood, but it's really hard to get good, not advice, to get good information. Obviously, Mark McYoung and Rory Miller are probably two of the leading people to get that information from. But, on the other hand, you don't want people to lock up and think that they're going to get in trouble and do 25 years because they had to defend themselves. It's just something you need to keep in mind. And one of my favorite things I learned from Rory was that your instincts, if you're a normal person, if you can answer these certain questions with, the right answer, do you want to hurt anybody needlessly? No. Do you want to kill people for no reason? No. Then you're a good person, and what you do is going to be in line with the law for the most part, especially if you get to learn these other things. Like, don't kick the guy in the head when he's on the ground. That's a bad thing to do,
Yeah, I'm totally in agreement with that. I was just talking about this the other day with one of my clients, and one of the points that I always bring up is that modern society in a Western country basically means that for the vast majority of people, they don't really come into contact with violence on a day-to-day basis. Again, I'm very careful in phrasing that. I'm not saying everybody, but for a large majority of them, violence isn't really an issue anymore. They lead relatively safe lives, so there's not really a big need for self-defense. However, the moment they do come into contact with it tends to end in a very spectacularly dramatic fashion for them, because they don't have the tools to handle it, and most of all, not the mental framework to see where the traps are, how they should handle themselves, what they should do, and so on. In particular, because for these kind of people, and again, I'm not saying this in a negative way, but it's just normal if most of your information comes from TV and watching movies and reading articles in magazines, then, well, there's a huge difference between the crap that's being promoted there on the one hand, or the information that might be valuable, but it is limited. It only shows one aspect or one particular take on how to handle yourself.
Yeah, correct. One of the things I like to make a comparison to is first aid and trauma care. It's not something you have to use every day, but it's easy to see the value in it. And when you need to use those skills, it pays to have the right equipment and the right training. And that's something that people can really easily grasp onto and understand, and yet they have difficulty understanding the same about self-defense.
Yeah, true. And I think that's actually a quite valid point, because one of the things you're more likely to have to face is that either you get injured, somebody dear to you gets injured, one of your children, your partner, doesn't matter, but that you're going to have to take care of somebody who gets hurt, and it's going to be an urgent need. You'll have to do it right then and there, no warm-ups, no preparation, with whatever you have handy. And if you do have a first aid kit ready, well, what's in there, and so on. So we get into a whole other furball of a discussion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's one of the things I'm really passionate about is, especially if you immerse yourself in self-defense and weapons training and stuff, you need to spend a good amount of time learning how to take care of the injuries that can happen. And then you realize that you're going to need those skills more than you're going to need the fighting skills just in regular life.
Yeah. What would you recommend to some of the listeners who want to start out on that path and just getting more involved with first aid and that side of self-defense?
Well, I know the American Red Cross offers a Stop the Bleed program now, which teaches the leading cause of death is hemorrhaging, bleeding to death in a traumatic incident, when there's medical trauma involved. And so they teach how to use tourniquets and direct pressure and gauze dressings and all that. There's also a lot of really, really good pages that you can look at, like on Facebook. Lone Star Medics is one of my favorites, and Caleb's a friend of mine, and he teaches classes all across the U.S. You could look at the TCCC guidelines, which is Tactical Combat Casualty Care, and that's what the military judges all their training and equipment by. And you could find those online. There's just so many resources. Just type in, into Google, blowout kits or trauma care or trauma medicine, and you could be immersed for days.
Yeah, I know. I remember back in the day when I started, looking into that, and I was very much interested in just finding good information, and was literally, like you say, blown away by just how much there is out there, and just how far it goes, how far you can go as a non-EMT to actually learn to handle these kinds of emergencies. Obviously, not with the purpose of replacing emergency personnel, but basically doing what you can as much as possible to either save the person that's there, or treat yourself until professional help can arrive.
Right. I mean, there's the theory in trauma medicine of the golden hour, and because of our Western society and how well off we have it, if you can have somebody survive that first hour after they get injured and get to a hospital or good medical care, the odds of surviving are incredible. People don't die like they used to.
Yeah, no, that's completely true. And just just quickly bring that back to the previous part we talked about, is I think that's one of the main reasons why they underestimate violence and don't understand how dangerous it can actually be. But at the same time, then we get the selfie generation who thinks it's a great idea to stand next to a wild animal and then and try to get a selfie with it, and then don't understand why they get crushed.
Yeah. We have one of the benefits of our society now is it's so advanced that, unless things go totally wrong, people generally don't starve to death. People don't have to live outdoors with no heat and stuff like that in the winter time. And I'm talking in generalities, obviously. But that has also removed us from what real danger actually is.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. This has been one of the things I've been hammering on my blog and so on for years now, is that common sense isn't common anymore. It's becoming a very rare commodity, and things that in the past would have been considered lunacy are now, for many people, seems like a good idea. Let's give it a try. And
yeah.
I'm not quite sure what the solution would be. Obviously, trying to spread as much as possible accurate knowledge, accurate information. But there seems to be a growing resistance against this kind of thing, and then we get to the whole, what is called snowflake mentality and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I think it's a huge problem, and it's a growing one. I don't want to get too political or anything, but just on general, how do you see that kind of that evolution when you compare it to self-defense and living, avoiding violence, avoiding danger in general?
Oh, that is such a deep subject. I could probably go on for hours. Some of the biggest things I see, though, is backtracking a little bit. Parents will always want to do their best for their kids and save them from being hurt or getting hurt feelings and stuff. And we've gone so far with that people can't deal with adversity. If you can't deal with adversity, you're going to freak out when it comes up. And there's nothing that shows adversity more than getting attacked. If you get attacked because you had your ego involved and you can't shut yourself up, then that's even more of a slap to your entire being. So it gets real hard for people to respond and react accordingly. We also, like you said, we're so far removed from what was just happening 20, 30 years ago as far as violence and how rough life was. I have a theory that a lot of the problems in the world is because we don't struggle anymore. No one has to go hunting. No one has to light a fire to get heat or light. We can turn on a faucet or a light switch, and things are taken care of. I'm sitting in Denver, Colorado, talking to you out over in Belgium. That was unheard of, 10 years ago? 15 years ago?
Yeah.
Things are it's incredible. But it does remove us, and common sense becomes more and more rare to where it's like a superpower, and you have to bring people from that to understand and acknowledge the reality of things. And that reality is different for different people. So what you think doesn't always apply, and so your way is not always the best way.
No, that makes perfect sense. And just a quick story here. A few years ago, I was in California in a part that's called the Lost Coast, in a really small town called Shelter Cove. And it's very remote. There's pretty much nothing there. And there's a beautiful beach. It's obviously, as it's remote, there was, I think, one other person that we saw when we took a walk there. But before we went there, we went to get breakfast, get a coffee, and so on. And we went to several places. And they asked, "What are you going to do here?" "Well, we're going to take a walk on the beach." Every single local said, "Do not come near the water. No matter what it looks like, don't go near the water," because many people think, "Well, this is just like any other beach, and I'll just wade into the water up until my ankles or whatever, and I'll be fine." And then they explain that the undertow is extremely strong, and you think you're fine, and you think you can get back, but due to the way that the beach is, just near the shore, it's relatively normal, but like a couple yards out, it's like it drops off a cliff, so it's very deep water, and it pulls everything back very quickly. Yeah. And you get dragged out deep into sea, and you just don't make it, because you cool down too quickly, go into undercooling, hypothermia, and that's it, you're done. And you might be an excellent swimmer, you might be in awesome shape, but you're not going to make it. And there are huge signs there, like don't go into the water. Everybody who sees a tourist says it. And the guy we went to get a coffee at, he said, well, last few weeks we had 3 people drown because they didn't listen.
Yeah. And that points out another thing, when there's somebody who is either a local or more experienced than you, you really should listen to them when they volunteer information.
Yeah, no, I think that makes perfect sense. And bringing it back to what we started, and it's like I said, what I always very much appreciated about you is that you talked from experience as opposed to just talking out of a theoretical framework, but just like living the lifestyle you did, the job you did, the experiences you've had. Whatever you showed translates into that. It's translated through that perspective. That's what I meant, and I think that applies to everything. Ask somebody who's been there, ask somebody who's living that, and see what happens. And maybe the advice doesn't apply to you personally, but there's a high likelihood that you'll find something useful there.
Yeah, I mean, there's commonalities in most situations. It's mostly a matter of degree. A lot of what I got into and had happen or did is not applicable to a normal person. But if you ramp down a couple degrees, then all of a sudden it can become applicable,
Yeah. No, I'm in total agreement with you on that. I think it's one of those things that, and this is my suspicion, I could be wrong, but what I feel is that there's this, for the last few decades, very slowly we've grown into a society where, especially young people obviously, get to the point where their individuality is critically important. And I wouldn't necessarily call it fighting against authority, but this inability to accept that somebody speaks from a position of authority due to training and experience, which makes their, I wouldn't even call it opinion, but the information they're sharing with you. And then we get into a tricky part, more valuable than whatever opinion you hold that is based on, well, a very, very limited amount of information and perhaps even no experience at all. And the example I usually give then is that there used to be, I can't remember the name anymore, but there was this book where it's about, how do you get rich quick. And it was like, make sure you get invited to talk shows and you can get consulting gigs on whatever topic. You just pick the 3 to 5 books that are most popular on that topic, read them, and then you say what's in there.
Yeah.
And that's what we call internet knowledge. You read an article on Wikipedia and you think you know what you're talking about, and that's simply not how it works.
Yeah, I remember a couple of years ago when I was still active on internet forums, somebody was blathering on about what happened in a knife fight, what would happen to somebody if they got cut and all that kind of stuff. And, coming from my experience, having actually been on both ends of it, I was telling them, no, you're wrong. What you're saying is going to get people hurt. And the person actually told me that my experience is not any better than their opinion.
Well, exactly. That's a perfect example of the mindset I'm talking about.
So I just kind of walked away and like, whatever, I did my best. But you got to wonder how people get to that point.
And that's one of the things that I find fascinating, especially because people seem to go out of their way, especially on social media, to share their opinions, no matter how ill-founded they are. Is how you get to a place where what you're saying is contradicting pretty much, I wouldn't say all knowledge known to mankind on that topic, but you're getting pretty damn close to it.
Yeah.
I find that fascinating, how people can live, basically get, like you say, get to that point.
Yeah, it's something I spend a lot of time contemplating. I write about it a little bit here and there, but it still doesn't make sense to me. We've gotten to the point where individuality is more important than actually staying alive.
Yeah, there was, I don't know if you ever saw that TV show, The Newsroom, and it started with a bang, where it's pretty much a washed-up journalist, and he's in this panel, I think, at a university, and he kind of gets cornered by the moderator who says, why is America the best country in the world?
I saw that film clip, yeah.
Remember that?
Yeah.
And the speech he gives there is actually really, really good for many reasons. I'm not even talking about, answering that question, but one of the things he said in there that always stuck with me was that we used to aspire to intelligence and not belittle it or feel threatened by it or something along those lines. And that was really something that stuck with me, because I think that encapsulates very well the mindset of what we see these days with many people, is that there's nothing wrong with being intelligent or having a lot of knowledge in a specific field. That doesn't devalue whatever you are as a person just because you don't have that. We have a mutual friend who's basically pretty much a rocket scientist.
Yeah,
and he's an awesome guy. He's so much smarter than me. And last time I visited him, I asked, can you talk about some of the work you did, because he obviously can't share everything. And he said, yeah, and he showed me this, and we're working on this satellite, and it's going to get launched, and blah blah blah, and it's going to be sent into this very particular spot into space, because the physics gets kind of weird at that point.
Yeah.
And I looked it up what he meant. He said talked about the Lagrange point, which is something very specific. I looked it up, and I looked at the physics formula that went along with it, and I'm like, that's it, I'm done.
Yeah.
But
I think one of the things that has helped, I mean, your outlook and my outlook, since we know so many of the same people, is we have been blessed to know so many incredible people who are just beyond genius. You know, we have the mutual friend that's a rocket scientist. We have another one that actually wrote the textbook for his field of chemistry. Another one that, several of them that are like computer geniuses that help the biggest companies in the world take over, and when you realize that you can be friends with them and interact with them and at the intimate level that we do, and it doesn't detract from what you're good at, it really helps to show that it takes everybody, all different kinds of knowledge, and it's not belittling to you that someone's better at something than you are.
Exactly. And I think that we're touching a little bit on what we mentioned before, is why is all this happening? Well, again, the cult of individuality is one thing, and not being resistant enough against negative things that happen in your life. But there's this idea that everybody needs to be a winner and this and that, which obviously implies that, competition, we're going to have to talk about how that works. Mm-hmm. Life isn't fair.
No.
And if life were fair, I'd be a great-looking guy like whatever movie star you want to have, and I'd be a gazillionaire, and I'd be in perfect health, but it isn't. And everybody would be the same. But that's just not how it works, and there are people who are way smarter than you are, no matter how much smart you are. And there are also a lot of people who will have a vastly larger amount of experience and knowledge on whatever topic you choose. Even if it is a topic of your choice, you're going to find somebody who knows more about it than you. But that doesn't mean that you suck at it. That doesn't mean that you're bad.
And if you look at it in the proper framework, it's an encouragement to learn more and get better and to understand.
Exactly.
It doesn't say that you're an idiot. It says, hey, there's all this more that I can learn. I've always loved cooking, but having the experience of living with another friend of ours, he is a world-level cook, and it upped my game and made me love it a lot more than I used to,
Yeah. Yeah. And that's one of the things that I see, is that if, like you said, we've been blessed to have such a circle of friends and people in our lives that are experts in their given fields, getting to know them as kind people who don't actually look down on you because you know nothing about what they're talking about, or you can't even, I can't even begin to understand, for instance, our chemist friend, the kind of stuff he does. That's just out of my league.
Yeah.
I'm just not smart enough to come even close to that. But that doesn't mean he looks down upon us. And quite on the contrary, many times when I wrote something, he wrote a small note in the comments or something like that, and I learned from it.
Yeah, exactly.
And it made me a better person and a more knowledgeable instructor, because somebody who has more insight actually shares it with me.
Yeah, and it also shows, I think, one of the things that is missing a lot from society, and we could bring it back to self-defense classes, is mutual respect. You don't just respect your teacher should respect you.
Yeah.
There's that video clip going around on Facebook right now of the two women UFC fighters. One's just bullying the hell out of the other one in her pregame, and the one that's doing the bullying ends up getting defeated, and she had to tap out just from getting hit in the face repeatedly. And,
yeah.
But that shows how far we've come from having mutual respect for each other, and especially in the fighting and martial arts arena.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I teach MMA as well, and that's one of the things that I tell my students sometimes. It's like, look, you see these guys, they're all over the news, they're famous, they're becoming millionaires. That doesn't mean that you have to be an idiot about it.
Yeah.
Now, give me the top 10 of any MMA category weight class in the UFC, and I'll show you the top 10 in tennis. You don't see any of the top 10 tennis players bad-mouthing their opponents.
Yeah.
They might blow them to little bits in a couple of sets, 0-6, and just dominate them, and they'll just be very respectful and say, look, I had a great day, and I saw this opening, that the way he was doing this, I could counter him that way, or I saw that he was having trouble with his backhand, so I tried to make him, and they just talk very factual about it and about the strategy and tactics they used and the techniques they used, as opposed to the whole macho nonsense that we see in combat sports.
Yeah, and it's depressing. I don't watch it, not just because of that, but that's one of the big reasons I don't really like it. If I want trash talking and stuff, I'll watch wrestling or listen to a comedian.
True. That makes perfect sense. Okay. Well, I wanted to ask you a couple other questions. I don't know if you can talk a little bit about, you worked for certain knife companies.
Yeah, I was lucky enough to, because of my passions and interests, get employed by 3 different ones. The 2 biggest ones, I worked for Spyderco for a little while, and I worked for Boker.
Yeah. And what was that like? Did you do design, or what kind of stuff did you do at those companies?
My official job was, at Boker I was called product specialist, but mostly I was involved in warranty and customer service. That expanded out into working with custom makers to try to get collaborations done. And I did have a hand in some designs and designed a couple of my own. At Spyderco it was just customer service and warranty work, which you learn a lot about knives that way too. But
yeah, well, this is one of the questions I get a lot. So I'd like to, from your point of view, get some information on that. What would you say would make a good knife for an everyday carry?
Okay, first, my very first caveat, and I tell everybody this, I could tell you what works for me, and it might not work for you. It's a personal thing. The guidelines that I like to give people are, first, don't pay attention to the blade shape. Pay attention to what you're carrying it for, what job you want it to do, and how comfortable the handle is in your hand. The handle is the interface with the knife. It's the part that you're holding on to. It's the part that needs to be secure. It's the part that you use. The blade is just out at the end doing different work. Plus, if you're into it, pay attention to what's legal in your city or state or country or whatever. Even if you don't want to abide by it, at least know what the law is so you know what you're getting into. But mostly it's just pay attention to the job that you want it to do. If you want something to open boxes, you don't need a 12-inch Bowie knife.
Yeah. That should be self-explanatory, but
you'd be surprised.
I was just going to say that. That's a good point. And that brings us to one of the things that you've written a lot about, and again in the past in the forums is things like everyday carry weapons, improvised weapons, and so on. But I saw a lot of your knife work that I liked a lot. When you look at an everyday carry knife, obviously there's going to be some overlap, and this is what many people then get into discussions that may or may not make sense, but it needs to be able to do stuff like opening boxes, and then they say, but I also want to use it for self-defense. So do you think that there's something that works along those lines, or would you say that it's best to separate those two functions? What's your take on that?
It's totally interchangeable. One of my favorite sayings, there's a couple of custom knife makers that I've been lucky enough to become friends with, but I admire the hell out of their work. It's some of the best work ever, and one of them is Fred Parent out of France.
Yeah.
And he mentioned something in a conversation we were having one time, that there are no tactical knives, there are just tactical minds. And
that makes perfect sense.
It's how you approach it. It's what is your mindset. You can use a pen to defend yourself if you have to. So my basic setup, I carry two knives. One is a small, just dedicated to self-defense for the most part. I have used it for utility stuff, but it's pretty much a self-defense. And then I have a bigger knife that I designed. 3.5-inch blade is bigger for me because I live in the city. And it does double duty. I can use it as a fighter. I can use it as a box opener. I can use it to help prepare food. A knife is a tool. It's your mindset that drives the tool.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, and that's what I wanted to ask also is about mistakes people make when they choose a knife, for instance, for self-defense. And I'll give you mine right away. It's the assumption that more expensive means better.
Yeah, there's a certain point to that. I wouldn't want to trust my life by using a knife for self-defense that I paid $4 for. But the reasons aren't because it's cheap. It's because to be that cheap, certain things have to be sacrificed, like possibly lock strength if you're buying a folder. Bad steel that doesn't keep an edge or that will break. No quality control, so it might break on you.
Yeah.
There's a midpoint. I don't believe you have to buy a $600 fighting knife to be safe. But, expect to spend $100, $150 or so, maybe $200, because you have to have a good whole package. I prefer fixed blades. That means I have to have something with good sheathing that I can carry every day, and it's not, obvious and messing with people that I have a knife. It's just, there's a point of diminishing returns. After a couple $100, you're really not getting anything extra other than pride of ownership.
Yeah, and that's mostly what it, in my opinion, then eventually gets to, is that people maybe start with finding a functional knife for a decent price, and then they get sucked into the world of knives, and there's so many wonderful and gorgeously made knives that are available for obviously more expensive prices. But then we get, like you say, to that point of diminishing returns. Is what's the goal other than owning it and admiring it, of having such a really expensive knife? Again, I have the utmost respect for the knife makers who are able to make those really wonderful knives. But from a self-defense perspective, then it's maybe that's not necessarily the best choice.
Right.
And I would then suggest, spend half of that money on a good knife and the other half on a good first aid kit.
Yeah, or get a training knife to go along with your knife.
Exactly.
That mimics what you carry. My setups are, especially over the last few years, I want a trainer that's the same shape and size and is close to the same weight, and I want the same sheath setup for it because, if you can't get the knife out when you need to, it's not going to do any good to carry it.
Exactly. That's a good thing. And here's another question that I wanted to fire at you from your experience. What would be some of the really big myths or misconceptions that martial artists and people who read about knife defense and knife work and so on, that you see that they have, that from what you've experienced, that it just isn't true?
The worst one is basically it's the same as a gunfight argument. Knockdown power. The knife doesn't have any. You're not going to stab somebody and they're going to fall. That's some crap that came from TV and movies. The other one is, and this is going to sound heretical because I do Filipino martial arts, but the whole idea of defanging the snake. Not only is it physically questionable, but taking it back to what self-defense actually is, you are making it look like the person who attacked you. If you're honestly defending yourself and you do like defending the snake attacks, you're making the guy who attacked you look like the victim because there's such a thing as defensive wounds. And that just happens to look exactly like the defending the snake, which means to cut the first thing that comes into your circle. I like to boil it down to one simple thing. I don't want to point out what all is wrong with what other people do or what thoughts they have.
Sure, of course.
But if you look at knife work for what it is, it's a lethal force encounter. It means that you're in fear of your life. You need to preserve your life by taking the life of the other person. So basically what you're doing is you're legally justifying murdering somebody. That takes all the other BS out that's involved with it. I don't want to be fancy. I don't want to do a bunch of tapping and passing drills. All I want to do is be able to put the pointy end into the other guy enough times, quick enough to where he doesn't kill me.
Yeah. No, it makes perfect sense, and I totally understand that. I obviously, my mindset is always that from a personal perspective, just me talking, about what I like is I like pretty much every martial art that is out there, barring some exceptions. So I always see the value in all of them. But then it boils down to the context that you can use them in, and
right.
Like you said, physical limitations, that's one context. But also, what is the purpose of that art? Is it a dueling art? Is it a self-defense art? Is it more oriented towards certain cultural aspects of the country that it originated in? Could be a bunch of things. For instance, me coming mainly from a Chinese martial arts background, there's a lot of cultural stuff in there that is not functional. It's pretty to watch, it's pretty to look at, and it refers to certain things from the Chinese culture. But it's not very effective in 2017 when we record this.
Right, and it also doesn't necessarily comport with what our laws are now compared to what their laws were then.
Exactly.
And that goes back to the context thing you were mentioning.
Yeah. Just for instance, you mentioned defying the snake. One of the things that in the sword and saber work that I teach is one of the key things is that if you can actually in your first move, instead of parrying the blade or blocking the blade or whatever, do that same movement on his hand or forearm, that's so much better.
Mm-hmm.
Just try to disarm him right away. I'm not saying that it's easy, so it's a very different aspect, but the way that you perform that technique is, defending against the blade as opposed to attacking him with your first move is the lesser choice. So why not go for his hand or wrist or whatever? And it goes further beyond that in certain positions that we have is a mindset of I'm going to put my hand right here because if he counters me now, the biggest threat is for him to come this way, and my arm is going to be way out there with my weapon, so I can't retract it in time. So I'm going to put my hand here, and I might lose the hand and the fingers, but I won't be dead yet. So that's a mindset. Some of the things that in 2017, when we record this here, that kind of mindset is very, very far removed from what the average person in the U.S. or in Belgium is thinking.
Right. I have rules of engagement, but the only one that really matters is whatever it takes, I'm going home. A lot of times that gets mistranslated as being something macho or I'm a tough guy. But no, it means if I can cross the street to avoid trouble to go home, that's what I'm going to do. If I can talk my way out of it, the last thing I want to do is have to kill somebody.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's one of the things that I see is also when you get into that whole discussion of you know what it is, like it's better to be judged by 12 than carried by 6, and I'm sure. I mean, if you look at that statement. Generally speaking, obviously that is true, but then we get into specifics. Well, that doesn't excuse you that doesn't give you an excuse to do whatever you like.
Right.
Let's put it that way.
Exactly.
That doesn't mean because somebody smudges your puma, like Chris Rock used to say, you don't have to kill him. And that's not a vicious assault you have to use lethal force for.
Mm-hmm. And one of the things and it's almost like a selling point against self-defense training, as it's commonly thought of. But you don't have to fight nearly as often as people think you do. But the articulation exercises that are involved with actual self-defense training can help you get out of a lot of other problems. Because you're learning how to talk to people.
Yeah. And that's like... one of the misconceptions, obviously, that I see when I worked a little bit as a bouncer, but obviously not as much as you did, and that generally people see the bouncer as just a guy who's going to throw the drunks out, throw the aggressive guys out, and fight. Whereas that should, preferably speaking, be the thing you do last.
Yeah. Well, first off, there's a big difference between different types of bouncers. There's different kinds of bars. I tended to work in bars that weren't really customer friendly, strip joints, biker bars, stuff like that, outlaw bars.
Yeah.
I worked in a couple that were off the books. The city didn't know they existed, so it's a whole different ballgame. But why I was able to evolve and become one of the highest paid bouncers in the Western U.S. was not because I could fight, but because I understood that the goal was to make the bar as much money as possible and to protect the owner's interests. I could talk people out. I could calm people down with my words. I didn't have to constantly be fighting and getting the cops called.
Exactly. And I think that's one of the key things is just that understanding that self-defense, when it gets to violence, well, there's usually a lot of opportunities you missed to avoid or de-escalate it.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, a lot of that involves being able to step outside yourself and realize that just because your ego is screaming doesn't mean that you're actually going to die.
Exactly. Which brings us full circle with the whole thing that we see in society nowadays, that people are no longer used to adversity, and heaven forbid somebody challenge their ego,
right, or
hurt their little duck feelings. It's easy to get into a fight that way that you could have totally avoided.
Absolutely. I'm embarrassed to admit how many of my fights were because of that when I was younger.
Yeah, no. Again, and that's the point that I feel should be put forward, is that you just said it, is that you're embarrassed to admit it. You understand that this is not the way to go, and experience has taught you, and getting older, you understand that, this isn't the way to go. Whereas what I see a lot of times is people just not owning that it's a mistake. They just like, nope, I was fully in my right to punch that guy in the face, because who the hell does he think he is? And it's like, no. Okay, technically speaking, sure, I get it, but still, there was another solution.
Yeah, I understand, but it doesn't mean that you're right,
Yeah. Okay, no, really good. We're closing in on the 1 hour mark, so I just wanted to ask some other questions. What are you doing right now? So, are you teaching, or what are you doing right now?
Yeah, I have classes here in Denver once a week, every Saturday. I travel to do seminars at least once a month generally. Next one is actually a week and a half from now. It's my last one for the year. I'll be in Berkeley, California at Soja Martial Arts doing actually a Salat workshop. I haven't taught Salat publicly for a long time. I also am writing and working with the Conflict Research Group, for their Conflict Manager magazine. I and Clint Overland run a group called Masters of Mayhem, and it's a multi-purpose umbrella kind of thing. We do teach self-defense and fighting and everything, but our main focus is to be there for people who need help and are coming out of the life and are having a hard time. And so that's a big focus for us right now.
Okay.
And speaking of Mom, we are having our inaugural seminar in February in Lubbock, Texas. It'll be the first time Clint and I have done a seminar together.
Yeah, and I've tweeted, I've put this on my Facebook page. For the listeners out there, if you can make that seminar, are there still spots open for that one?
Yeah.
Because it was filling up, I think.
It's filling up fast, but, it's holiday time, and it's still a couple months out, so not everybody has paid their deposits, and unfortunately it'd be a first-come, first-served basis. Okay.
Well, I just want to very clearly state to everybody listening that if you can get a spot to the Masters of Mayhem seminar, just go there. Just whatever you need to do, take a holiday, break open the bank, doesn't matter, but get there.
One warning, Clint and I are pretty unorthodox, and the language can get kind of colorful.
Yeah, now, ladies and gentlemen, you just heard the understatement of the century. So,
I've learned how to behave myself on these interview things, so.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it, and then the clean rating for this podcast episode will probably hold. But no, everybody, if you can go there, I mean, you're going to learn some first-hand, real-world violence experience from people who would. And I'm not going to be modest. You don't have to say anything, Terry, but Terry and Clint can put a lot of the really big-name self-defense instructors to shame with just an ounce of the knowledge they have, compared to the entirety of the knowledge these instructors claim to have. And I'm not singling out anybody. It's just the level of experience and the depth of knowledge that they have is very, very different from many of the things that I've seen and people I've trained with and experienced. So that is why I'm so very clear in endorsing and trying to promote this seminar, because I really hope there will be more of them, so that I can actually attend one.
Yeah, we're in discussions to bring it to a couple different places already, even though the first one hasn't happened yet. I really appreciate what you're saying and how you're endorsing.
Oh, my pleasure, and this is completely selfish of me because I can't make it to the first one, and if there's not a second one, I'll never be able to attend one. But I'll be out with my shoulder for a little while, so this is just me being selfish and making sure that there's more seminars coming down the line, so that people can actually get really good experience.
Yeah,
and go ahead.
The other thing I'm involved with is Violence Dynamics, which is brainchild of basically Casey Kakaisen, who's a cop in Minnesota, Rory Miller, and Mark McYoung. And we are holding more and more of those. Started out with just one a year, then it grew to 2 a year. We had 3 last year. And those are going to keep continuing to grow, and the group has grown. We also have Randy King and Tammy McCracken with us. And it's an excellent seminar. It's a mixture of all the mental and intellectual side of things, mixed with some really good, effective physical training. So I would encourage people to look at those too. We should have a new website up pretty soon.
Yes, same thing applies here. I mean, from I know some of the folks at Violence Dynamics and just like you, all great instructors with tons of experience and an excellent take on the subject matter they teach. So I would very much also recommend people, if you can get to one of those seminars, just do so. You won't regret it. From everything that I've heard from people who attended afterwards, what I've seen is they were raving about it, and knowing you and Mark and Rory and a bunch of the other guys, I can only recommend that too, because it's again concrete stuff. I'm not saying no theory, obviously some theory, but it is based out of experience and things that actually work, as opposed to theoretical models that you can come up with in the safety of your own brain. And that, in contrast with what you guys are doing, is just that, well, there was this guy, I got attacked by a guy trying to crush my head in with a hammer, and this is what happened, that's what I did, and so on. And then these years and years of experience of all the instructors coming together, and I think Violence Dynamics is also a very special, a special kind of seminar that people can attend to, along with the Masters of Mayhem.
Yeah, I'm lucky to be involved in some really, really good and effective and transformational stuff.
I agree. Well, final thing, Terry, how can people get in touch with you? Where can they reach you? Do you have a website, a Facebook page, or how they can get in touch with you?
Well, I have a sub-website on the Conflict Research Group International website, which is crgidojo.com. Facebook's probably the best way and easiest way. I have my personal page there, which is just Terry Trahan. And also there's a terrytrahan.com Facebook page. Or you can reach me through the Conflict Manager Facebook page.
Okay. Well, what I'll do is I'll put some links in the show notes for people to look up, and I'll put a bunch of the things that we talked to. I'll put that also into the show notes, so that they can get access to all this information and get in touch with you. First of all, I want to thank you, Terry, for this last hour of talking to me and agreeing to this interview. Very much appreciated. And I hope that the listeners, that you guys also got a lot of information out there, out of it, obviously, that's what I meant, so that you can use it in your own training and in your own daily life to stay safe and defend yourself should the need arise. So once again, a really big thank you to you, Terry.
Oh, thank you.
And I'll talk to you guys soon.
All right, and remember, we need more chocolate.
I'll get on that.
All right. Thanks, Win.
Thanks, Terry.
Have a good one.
Okay.
Thanks for listening to the Win Demeere podcast. For more information, go to www.winsblog.com.